He was only a farmer, yet they called him Death. February the 17th, 1940. The air itself was a weapon, -40 degrees Celsius. 34-year-old Kaarle Sarma lay completely still in the snow. A phantom in white. His rifle, a rugged, simple Finnish M28-30 with iron sights, settled against his shoulder. 400 meters away, Soviet soldiers, bulky and slow, moved through the frozen, fractured forest. Kaarle couldn't breathe normally. He daren't. At this temperature, a single puff of condensation would bloom in the air like a deadly white flower, a signal flare betraying his position. So he did the impossible, the insane. He packed a mouthful of snow, letting the frigid crystals melt slowly, chilling his breath to the point of invisibility. No visible vapor. He had done this 247 times before. Today would be number 248. This was no product of advanced military schooling, no polished marksman from a storied academy. This was a Finnish farmer, barely 5'3" tall, a man using a rifle with no magnification. And in 105 days, a mere 3.5 months, he would be credited with over 500 confirmed kills, more sniper kills than any soldier in any war in recorded history, according to most accounts. The Finnish papers dubbed him Valkoinen Kuolema, the White Death, and the Soviets were hunting him with everything they possessed. November 30th, 1939, 8 a.m. The Soviet artillery began to roar, shelling Finnish positions along an 800-mile border. 21 divisions initially, expanding to 26. Over 450,000 soldiers at the start, eventually swelling to more than 1 million. Approximately 6,000 tanks, 3,880 aircraft. One of the largest military operations between the world wars had just begun. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet premier, wanted Finland. He demanded territorial concessions. The Finns refused. Stalin assumed conquest would take weeks. He was wrong. Finland could field only 337,000 soldiers total, many of them reservists, many of them simple farmers. They had just 32 tanks in total, with only 10 combat-ready, compared to the Soviet 6,000. They started with 114 combat aircraft, rising to about 130 through foreign aid, compared to the nearly 4,000 arrayed against them. The math was simple, stark, and terrifying. Finland was going to lose. The only question was how quickly. In the southern Karelia region, Finnish military commanders called up their reserves. One of those reservists was a man named Kaarle Sarma. Small, even by Finnish standards, he'd spent his entire adult life farming near the village of Ruokojärvi, about 40 miles from the Soviet border. Before the war, he'd been unremarkable. A farmer who hunted in his spare time, a competitive target shooter. Yes, but nothing extraordinary. He'd completed his mandatory military service years earlier without distinction. He reported to the 6th Company of JR 34, a Finnish infantry regiment, on November 30th, 1939, the day the Soviet Union invaded. He brought his own rifle, a Finnish-produced Mosin Nagant. This rifle, plain and unadorned, would become the most lethal weapon of the Winter War, but not because of its specifications. The Mosin Nagant was not an impressive weapon on paper. It fired at about 810 meters per second. Its effective range was roughly 500 meters with iron sights. It held 5 rounds in an internal magazine. It was standard issue for millions of soldiers on both sides. But Sarma's rifle had one critical absence. It had no scope. This was not an oversight. This was deliberate. Most military snipers of the era used telescopic sights. Magnification gave them longer effective range, made distant targets larger and clearer, standard military doctrine. Sarma understood something those military manuals didn't. In the forests of eastern Finland in winter, a scope would get you killed. First, the cold. Temperatures regularly dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. Scopes fogged. Lenses cracked. The metal contracted differently than the rifle barrel, throwing off accuracy. Second, the light. At that latitude in winter, you had maybe 6 hours of usable daylight. Scopes caught glare from snow. A single reflection could give away your position. Third, the height. A scope mounted on a rifle raises your head several inches higher when aiming. In the prone position, those inches matter. They expose more of your silhouette. They make you visible. Iron sights. No magnification. No reflection. No mechanical failure. Lower profile. But this meant Kaarle had to be close. Most of his shots would be under 400 meters, well within range for enemy return fire. He would have to be very, very good or very, very dead. The first Soviet units crossed the border expecting minimal resistance. Finnish forces fell back into the forests. The Soviets assumed they were retreating in panic. They were wrong. Finnish commanders understood their only advantage. The Soviets had overwhelming numbers and firepower. But they were constrained to roads. In the dense forests of Karelia, tanks and artillery couldn't maneuver effectively. Massive Soviet columns had to advance on narrow forest roads. This made them vulnerable, predictable, exposed. The Finns called it Matti tactics, from the Finnish word for a measured stack of firewood. Cut the column into sections. Isolate each piece. Destroy them individually. This is where Kaarle Sarma found his purpose. December 1939. Kaarle's unit dug in along the Kolari River, a strategic defensive line about 25 miles from initial border positions. Soviet forces outnumbered them 12-1. Daily attacks, constant pressure. The Finns held, and Kaarle started hunting. His approach was methodical, patient, invisible. He would move into position before dawn, full winter camouflage. A white oversuit over his uniform, his face covered. He moved alone. No spotter, no radio, no support. He would find a position with good sight lines, cover, and multiple escape routes. Then he would wait, sometimes for hours, in temperatures cold enough to kill an exposed man in minutes. His targeting priorities showed tactical sophistication far beyond his training. Officers first, anyone with binoculars, maps, or command insignia. Then machine gunners. Then anyone who looked like they knew what they were doing. He understood that killing the competent soldiers first created chaos among the remainder. Leaderless units hesitated, made mistakes, exposed themselves. The pattern that emerged was terrifying for Soviet forces. An officer would drop, single shot, no sound. By the time his body hit the ground, Kaarle had cycled the bolt and acquired his next target. Another shot, another body, 3, 4, sometimes 5 Soviet soldiers dead before anyone even located where the shots came from. Then, silence. Kaarle would extract from his position using routes he'd planned before the shooting started. By the time Soviet soldiers organized a response, he was gone. Finnish army records show extraordinary effectiveness. By December 22nd, just 22 days into the war, Kaarle had 138 confirmed sniper kills. That's more than 6 kills per day during the limited daylight hours of Finnish winter. The Soviets started to notice. Reports filtered up the command chain. Unusually high officer casualties in the Kolari sector. A pattern of single-shot kills at medium range. No visible shooter. Survivors described attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. Finnish propaganda dubbed the phenomenon Valkoinen Kuolema, the White Death. Initially, Soviet commanders thought it was multiple snipers. The kill pattern was too consistent, too widespread, too effective. No single soldier could account for that level of effectiveness. They were wrong. January 1940. Soviet commanders realized they had a problem. The high officer casualty rate in the Kolari sector was degrading unit effectiveness. Companies were losing leadership faster than they could replace it. Morale was collapsing. Intelligence officers interrogated prisoners, analyzed attack patterns, compared reports from multiple units. The conclusion was disturbing. Most of the kills appeared to be the work of a single sniper, operating with extreme effectiveness in conditions that should have made long-range shooting nearly impossible. The Soviet response escalated in stages. First, they sent counter-snipers, experienced marksmen with scoped rifles. Their job was simple: locate and eliminate the White Death. Kaarle killed them. The counter-snipers made a critical mistake. They assumed they were hunting an opponent using similar tactics. A sniper with a scoped rifle, taking long-range shots from elevated positions. But Kaarle wasn't fighting that way. He positioned himself lower, closer, used terrain the scoped snipers overlooked. By the time a Soviet counter-sniper spotted the angle of incoming fire, Kaarle had already killed him and moved. The iron sights that seemed like a limitation were actually providing Kaarle with a critical advantage. He could press himself flatter against the ground. He produced no scope reflection, and he'd spent his entire life hunting in these forests with iron sights. He knew the sight picture instinctively. The Soviet counter-snipers lasted an average of 2 days before being killed or withdrawn. Second escalation: artillery. If they couldn't shoot him, they'd bomb him. Soviet commanders began calling in artillery strikes on suspected sniper positions. Any area where casualties occurred would be saturated with explosive shells. The logic was simple. If you can't see him, destroy the entire area where he might be. Kaarle adapted. He began taking shots from positions further back from obvious sight lines. He never used the same position twice. He developed an almost precognitive sense for when artillery was about to be called in. Veterans from his unit later reported that Kaarle would sometimes withdraw from a position minutes before shells started landing. How did he know? Pattern recognition. He understood that Soviet units followed protocols. After taking casualties, they would call for artillery support. There would be a delay while the request moved up the chain of command and coordinates were transmitted. Usually 15 to 20 minutes. Kaarle would take his shots, wait exactly 12 minutes. Then, the artillery would arrive to an empty forest. By mid-February, 1940, various Finnish military records credited him with well over 200 confirmed sniper kills. Some accounts suggested the number exceeded 300 by late February. Soviet commanders deployed counter-sniper teams and massive artillery barrages, specifically targeting the Kaarle sector. Entire companies received counter-sniper protocols. Nothing worked. By early February 1940, Soviet forces in the Kaarle sector had developed a pathological fear of wooded areas. Officers refused to wear their insignia. Soldiers avoided exposing themselves unnecessarily. Units requested transfers out of the region. One sniper, one rifle, no scope, and he was destroying the combat effectiveness of forces that outnumbered him by thousands to one. How did he do it? Lessons from the White Death. Veterans who served with Kaarle Sarma provided details that have become part of military sniper training worldwide. The snow-in-mouth technique, confirmed by multiple witnesses from his unit. Kaarle would pack snow into his mouth before taking a shooting position. The snow would melt slowly, cooling his breath. At $-40 circ C, text $, warm breath creates visible vapor that can persist for several seconds. That vapor would mark his position as clearly as a signal flare. Cold breath produces no visible condensation. No condensation means no visual signature. Kaarle understood this instinctively from years of hunting in winter. Snow management. Before taking a position, Kaarle would pack down and smooth the snow in front of him. This prevented the muzzle blast from kicking up a cloud of snow particles. Soviet counter-snipers watched for snow puffs to identify shooter positions. Kaarle eliminated that telltale sign. Additionally, he would sometimes pour water on the packed snow and let it freeze. This created a smooth, hard surface that produced even less disturbance when firing. The height advantage. Reverty Soviet snipers assumed their opponent would take elevated positions. Higher ground provided better sightlines and protection standard doctrine. Kaarle did the opposite. He positioned himself low, sometimes in depressions or behind fallen logs. Without a scope, he could press his body almost completely flat, while still maintaining the sight picture. This made him nearly invisible from standard Soviet counter-sniper positions. The exit strategy. Kaarle never took a position without planning multiple extraction routes. He would spend more time planning his escape than planning his shots. He understood that the shot was the easy part. Getting away alive was harder. He would memorize terrain features behind him without looking. Count his movements. Know exactly how many low-crawl movements it took to reach different pieces of cover. When artillery started landing, he could extract in zero visibility, in complete smoke and confusion. because he'd already mapped his escape before firing a shot. Target selection. Kaarle didn't shoot randomly. Every target was selected based on maximum tactical impact. Officers first, as mentioned, but specifically officers who appeared competent. An officer reading a map. An officer organizing soldiers effectively. An officer who seemed calm under pressure. Those were priority targets. Machine gunners second. A machine gun could pin down an entire Finnish squad. Killing the gunner eliminated the threat and often caused the rest of the Soviet unit to become more cautious. The pattern was consistent. Kill the people who made the Soviet units effective. Force the remainder to operate with degraded leadership, firepower, and coordination. The silenced Kaarle rarely spoke about his kills. Fellow soldiers reported that he treated it as work. He would return to camp, clean his rifle, eat, sleep, and prepare for the next day. No boasting, no storytelling, just methodical, professional execution of his role. This psychological distance may have been what allowed him to sustain such a high operational tempo. While Soviet soldiers developed trauma from being hunted by an invisible killer, Kaarle treated it as a technical problem, requiring technical solutions. By February 1940, his techniques had been studied and adopted by other Finnish snipers, but none of them achieved anything close to his effectiveness. The difference wasn't the technique. It was the combination of perfect environmental knowledge, instinctive shooting ability, tactical intelligence, and psychological resilience. Kaarle represented something rare in military history: the perfect intersection of individual capability and environmental circumstance. He was the right person in the right place with the right skills at the right time, and the Soviets could not stop him. By early March 1940, Finnish military records credited Kaarle Sarma with extraordinary effectiveness. Division Commander Antero Spensson's certificate from February the 17th documented 219 rifle kills and 219 submachine gun kills. Military chaplain Antti Rantama's diary entry from March 7th noted 259 rifle kills and 259 submachine gun kills. Kaarle's own memoir, written in 1940 and discovered decades later, estimated around 500 total on his sin list. Most historical accounts cite 505 confirmed sniper kills, though some suggest the figure could be as high as 542. The exact number remains disputed among historians due to varying confirmation methods and the chaos of battlefield conditions. What is certain? In approximately 100 days of combat, Kaarle killed more enemy soldiers than virtually any other sniper in recorded history. The Winter War was reaching its conclusion. Soviet forces had suffered catastrophic casualties. Estimates vary widely, but commonly cited figures based on declassified Soviet archives suggest over 126,000 dead and nearly 265,000 wounded, though some Russian historians argue for higher numbers for a war that was supposed to last weeks. But Soviet numerical superiority was finally overwhelming Finnish defenses. Finland was running out of men, ammunition, and time. Peace negotiations were underway. On March the 6th, 1940, Kaarle Sarma was in his usual position, somewhere in the forests near Kolari, waiting. What happened next has been reconstructed from medical records and witness testimony. A Soviet soldier fired an explosive round. Some sources say it was a counter-sniper. Others say it was a random shot. The exact circumstances are unclear. What is clear: the round struck Kaarle directly in the face. The explosive round entered his left cheek. The blast destroyed his lower jaw, shattered bone fragments, massive tissue damage. His left cheek was essentially blown off. Finnish soldiers who witnessed it assumed he was dead. The injury was catastrophic. Survival seemed impossible. But Kaarle Sarma did not die. He was evacuated to a field hospital. Still alive, though barely. Military doctors worked to stabilize him. The damage was so extensive that full reconstruction would require multiple surgeries. He remained unconscious for 1 week. On March the 13th, 1940, He regained consciousness. The same day, the Winter War officially ended with the Moscow Peace Treaty. Finland ceded territory, gave the Soviets what they demanded, but Finland remained independent. They had fought the Soviet Union to a standstill. A nation of 3.7 million had held off a nation of 170 million, inflicted casualties at a ratio estimated at 5-1, demonstrated that Soviet military doctrine had fundamental flaws. And when Kaarle Sarma woke up, the war he'd been fighting for 105 days was over. The medical records from Kaarle's treatment paint a picture of almost miraculous survival. His jaw was shattered in multiple places. His left cheek had been destroyed. Multiple teeth were gone. Bone fragments had to be removed from throughout his facial structure. He underwent 26 reconstructive surgeries over several years. Finnish military surgeons rebuilt his jaw using bone grafts and innovative techniques. The left side of his face never fully recovered. For the rest of his life, his face bore visible scars from the injury. His jaw was slightly misaligned. He had permanent nerve damage affecting his facial expressions. But he survived. Shortly after the war ended on August the 28th, 1940, Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim promoted Kaarle Sarma from corporal directly to second lieutenant. This extraordinary battlefield promotion bypassed several ranks, Finland's way of honoring his contribution to the war effort. When reporters asked him about his kill count, Kaarle gave characteristically brief responses. "I did what I was told to do as well as I could. There would be no Finland unless everyone had done the same." He refused to discuss specific kills, refused to glorify the violence, treated his wartime service as a necessary duty. Completed, now finished. After recovering sufficiently from his injuries, Kaarle returned to his farm, the same farm he'd left when the war started. He spent the rest of his life there. He never returned to military service, never worked as an instructor or consultant, never capitalized on his fame. He simply went back to farming, breeding dogs, hunting moose, living quietly in the forests of eastern Finland. Journalists occasionally sought him out. He would answer their questions politely but briefly. Never elaborated. Never sought attention. When asked if he regretted any of his actions during the war, he gave a response that has become famous. "I did what I had to do." This wasn't callousness. This was a man who had compartmentalized an impossible psychological burden, who had survived by treating killing as a technical problem, who now wanted nothing more than to return to normal life. He lived quietly on his farm for 62 more years. He watched the Cold War develop, saw Finland navigate a delicate balance between East and West, watched military technology advance far beyond the iron-sighted rifles he'd used. Military historians sought his insights. Sniper training programs wanted him as a consultant. He declined nearly all requests. In the few interviews he did give, he emphasized not his kills but the broader Finnish defensive effort, spoke highly of his fellow soldiers, downplayed his individual contribution. He lived to see the Soviet Union collapse. The nation he'd fought against ceased to exist. He made no public statements about it. Kaarle Sarma died on April the 1st, 2002. He was 96 years old. He died in a nursing home in Hamina, Finland, surrounded by caretakers who knew him simply as an elderly veteran. Many of them had no idea they were caring for one of the most effective snipers in military history. His funeral was attended by Finnish military officials, veterans, and family. He was buried with full military honors. The man who had killed hundreds of Soviet soldiers in 105 days, who survived being shot in the face with an explosive round, who became a legend simply by doing his duty as well as he possibly could. He lived a quiet life, died a quiet death, never sought glory, never claimed to be anything more than a soldier who did what was asked of him. The story of Kaarle Sarma raises uncomfortable questions about military history. Verification. The most commonly cited figure of 505 confirmed kills comes from Finnish military records. However, historians acknowledge significant uncertainty. Division Commander Spencen's certificate from mid-February documented 219 rifle kills plus 219 submachine gun kills. Military chaplain Rantama's diary from March 7th noted 259. Kaarle's own memoir estimated around 500. Some accounts claim as high as 542. Finnish historian Risto Marjomäki, however, credits more than 200, noting that confirmation of casualties was difficult due to absence of bodies. The real number might be lower. It might be higher. It's impossible to know with certainty. What is certain, Kaarle Sarma was extraordinarily effective. Contemporary Finnish military records document his progressive kill count. Soviet casualties in the Kolari sector were documented. The timeline matches. The tactics match. Something extraordinary happened in those forests. Psychological cost. How does a human being kill hundreds of other human beings and remain sane? The answer appears to be compartmentalization. Kaarle treated it as a technical problem, removed emotional content, focused on duty and effectiveness, never allowed himself to think of enemy soldiers as individuals. His post-war silence suggests the psychological burden was real. He didn't talk about it because he couldn't talk about it, or because talking about it would force him to confront what he'd done. He chose farming, chose animals and quiet, chose a life as far from violence as possible. Tactical lessons. Military sniper training programs worldwide now teach techniques Kaarle pioneered or perfected. The snow-in-mouth technique for cold weather operations. Position selection emphasizing concealment over elevation. Escape route planning before engagement. Target prioritization focused on degrading enemy effectiveness. Modern military doctrine acknowledges that a well-trained sniper in defensive terrain can influence tactical situations far beyond their individual capability. Kaarle proved this in the most extreme circumstances possible. The technology question. His refusal to use a scope has become legendary, but it raises an interesting point about military technology. Advanced equipment only provides an advantage if it's appropriate for the conditions. A scope in -40 degrees Celsius temperatures, with 6 hours of daylight and dense forest terrain, was actually a disadvantage. Kaarle understood his environment better than Soviet doctrine understood it. He used equipment appropriate for the conditions. His opponents used equipment appropriate for conventional warfare. Adaptability beat standardization. Local knowledge beat doctrine. Simplicity beat complexity. The broader impact. The Winter War exposed fundamental weaknesses in Soviet military capability. Officer corps depleted by Stalin's purges, poor cold weather equipment, inadequate training for forest warfare, a rigid command structure that couldn't adapt to unconventional tactics. Adolf Hitler observed these weaknesses. He concluded that the Soviet Union was vulnerable. This observation influenced his decision to launch Operation Barbarossa in 1941. One of history's greatest military blunders was partially based on lessons from the Winter War. Finally, the human element. Strip away the legend. Remove the mythology. What remains? A 3-4-year-old farmer who found himself defending his homeland against overwhelming odds. Who discovered he had a rare combination of skills perfectly suited for a specific type of warfare. Who performed his duty with extraordinary effectiveness. Who paid for that effectiveness with permanent physical and psychological scars? Who survived? Who went home? Who lived a quiet life? Who died an old man? The White Death was not superhuman. He was simply a man who found himself in circumstances where his particular skills mattered more than they ever should have had to. Today, a memorial stands near Kolari. It commemorates the Finnish soldiers who held the line during the Winter War. Kaarle's name is listed among them. Not prominently, not specially, just listed with the others who served, exactly as he would have wanted it. The forests around Kolari are quiet now, peaceful. Snow still falls in winter. The temperature still drops to -40 degrees. But no one is hunting anyone anymore. Kaarle Sarma fought his war, survived his war, went home, and the forests remember.